Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So this past weekend we just got our first real insight into what the post-Blazing Dominion format will look like, so I figured now is about as good time as any to give you guys my thoughts and insights on which decks are going to be the strongest in the new upcoming formats, which decks you should bring to tournaments, and which decks you should expect to face at such tournaments. Also, the last time I did this, it got a pretty decent amount of views, and I'm apparently a views whore now, so guess we're doing this again. Woo! So getting right into it, the first deck I have up in the shopping block is Power Patron Archmage, which I will be honest, was the deck I expected to be the weakest out of the four Medius decks. So I will say I have been surprised, while not pleasantly, by the deck. Every time it was featured during both the French Nationals and YCS Columbus, it put on quite a good performance. For instance, playing through, I believe it was both Impulse and Spark, like it didn't happen on a hand of Stadry Thunder. I think this deck is strong, though personally I think it has a lot of issues. It seems like it's mid into Fuba, bad into Droll, and it also kind of seems just inferior to Doomsday in both brick count and how the cards play into boards going second. But I would say I'm honestly not qualified to properly place this deck, though I would place it in tier 2 at the moment, but in a high tier 2. Next is the Fairy Tale Magistus deck. I've heard a decent amount of people talk about it. It showed up on stream a decent amount. From what I can tell, these cards just seem mediocre compared to the cards to format. You're forced to play a lot of like not great cards in your deck, and I just don't see the advantage apart from your opponent having to read your cards, which is a great advantage, but if there's nothing else it's kind of like, why are you playing this? So I would place this between bottom of tier 2 and high tier 3. It's going to go in high tier 3 for now, but this is like one of the decks where I wouldn't be surprised to see it at a low to mid tier 2, if at best. Then we have Pure Power Patron. This is a deck that I've seen a lot of talk about. It's also a deck that it showed up a little bit on stream, but not much. I believe Jeff Jones had a feature with it, but he didn't seem like he was too into it. He seemed very tired and kind of out of focus. I've heard a lot of things about this deck. I've seen it's able to FTK in multiple different ways. It's able to functionally FTK by searching out Pendulum Floodgates. It's able to do a lot of random things. But overall it seems like kind of your standard combo deck that loses to Draw, loses to Fuva, kind of in the same fashion as Archmage. And it also feels like a lot of the cards like Geprido, Navido and Ginaldo are like subpar starters at best. So it kind of feels like you're giving up on a lot of grind game and a lot of resilience in a format where the top decks really rely on such. The one good thing I will say about this deck is it's able to play double, like it can play double Dominus, both Spark and Impulse, and it can also theoretically play Songs of Dominators, so it gets to play very strong non-engine. But this is another deck I would put in like high tier 2. I think it has like a lot of the same qualifications as Archmage. I'd probably put it right above Archmage just because it doesn't have like all the like bad cards like Littera, Finmao, the traps, to the same extent that Archmage does, and it's also not reliant on one card, the Archmage Field spell, to the same extent that Archmage is. Next we have Doomsday, or Power Patron Doomsday. Some people play a higher Power Patron count, some people play a lower one. This deck is good, like it's not fooling anyone. The question is whether it can compete with like the two big dogs of the format. The end board is good, the starters are resilient, it has a lot of strong engine. For now I would probably put this deck in tier 1.5, but I think this is one that can go either way. It can either be prove itself to be a tier 1 deck, or it can be like probably the best tier 2 deck in the format. I think it's either or. Other things to note about the deck is that it gets to play Shifter, and it doesn't really seem to lose to any particular non-engine. It's not happy about Fuva, but between Drastia and the Trap you still can get a real end board with fewer draws than you would expect. Next up I have Radiant Typhoon. This is honestly just here because I heard some people talk about it seeming to have good matchups into the format, and I was also thinking that. If the ban list hadn't put on to one, this was probably the deck I would have brought to potential nationals as of the moment, because the Cool Twin matchup seems right out phenomenal, and the random matchup seems fine. The Power Patron deck matchup also seems fine because you can play through boards relatively freely, and cards like Droplet and Crown are very well positioned at the moment. However, with one chant and you're being forced into the like more awkward consistency cards, and also with engines kind of eclipsing the ability to be stopped by cards like Mandate and Varun like alone, I just don't think Radiant puts up enough of a board to justify the kind of follow-up that it has. Like Radiant's grind game is kind of based around you stop your opponent and then you can force this like slower game where you are the better grind deck, but the advantage you're gaining is not like immense, and the pressure you're applying is not immense. And I think against a deck like Branded, for instance, that probably will be stifled by your end board, but will just generate so much advantage as follow-up, you will probably just get overwhelmed. So I will put this deck, I think it's probably better than the Fairy Tale deck, overall. But I don't think it's bottom of tier 2 to mid tier 2 at best, as far as I see it. Just purely results-wise, Branded is probably the best deck of the weekends. It had more top cut spots than Kultun. It was 3 out of 4 finalists between both the French Nationals and the YCS Columbus. I mean, the deck is very, very strong. It can play through boards very easily. It gets like enough non-engine capacity to where it can typically draw 1 or 2 non-engine to help either play through the board or deal with like one problem that your opponent presents. Like Super Poly to take away like a Drastia or a Drastrius equipped with a trap against Doomsday, or a Cold Bio or Super Poly or Droplet to make it awkward for Kultun when they see the breaker in your hand. I mean, this deck is just phenomenal. The only issues that I can see with it is that you're forced to play like a lot of awkward cards, not just in the same capacity or like as awkward as Branded has been forced to historically. Like, the card quality has increased from like Tragedy and Macaria, but like cards like Incredible Ecclesia, Guiding Quem, Tri-Brigade Brigand's Kit, these are still not amazing cards to draw by themselves, and they're not always amazing to draw with like specific engine pieces either. You do have discard outlets for like Lubellion, Albaz, High Spirits, and Opening, but still your hand quality can be a bit low, and also you like not all of your starters are individually amazing. Like obviously White Dragon, High Spirits are very strong, and by extension Aluba and Opening because they're just tutors for those. But Branded Fusion, for instance, can be a very mediocre starter if it's drawn alone. Next up we have Malice. I think Malice right now is probably just the definition of a tier 2 deck. I would put it somewhere between the pure Power Patron deck. I think they share a lot of qualities. I would probably, just by my preference in decks and playstyles, put it above, just because I think it's a little bit more consistent and it has a little bit more less fun of the awkward cards. Like every Malice engine card is either a starter or an extender, so you're typically like not mad to see these cards in your hand outside of specifically like Mirror and DWC. Like even MTP and TB11 are extenders that can help you play through hand traps and help you play through boards. But the appeal of this deck is definitely just a non-engine. It's a very good player of Bestials, meaning it naturally has a pretty decent Branded matchup, but I don't think it's amazing. The end board is, compared to what it was, it's so much worse because the Malice end board has always been breakable. The problem in the past was that they would just go, any effect, get back White Binder, banish the whole grave, get back everything, and breaking the board essentially did nothing because they'd get their whole board back every turn. That is no longer the case. Meaning the Malice follow-up is actually quite mediocre, and the end board is like draw 4 plus 2 banishes and a negate, which isn't bad with all the knowledge you get to play, just makes you very reliant on seeing those cards. Next up we have Elf Note. This is honestly, in my opinion, the most disappointing of the Medius decks in terms of competitive results, and I'm quite happy about that. I do not like the way it plays at all. A deck that has double hand draw plus omni negates is never cool in my opinion, but it just feels like the deck that has like the Medius deck problem to the highest extent. It seems terrible into both Fuba and Droll, and it feels like a lot of your cards, like the Trap, Regina, etc., either rely on having other engine cards or just aren't starters by themselves. And you're generally forced to play like support engines like Power Patron, and I mean, I don't just mean like the Elf Note associated Power Patron, like just the Power Patron engine as like an independent thing, because Elf Notes don't access Power Patrons and Power Patrons don't directly access Elf Notes. And or like you've also played the Cliche and the Branded cards, and then you kind of get the problem of if you draw one of these support engines without Elf Notes, you're basically just playing a worse version of whatever deck the support engine is from. So personally, I would probably put this deck, like, it's like high tier 3, somewhere around here. I'm not the most qualified to speak, because I have not played a lot of Elf Note nor played against a lot of Elf Note, but just from what I can tell, it feels like a deck that can very rarely play through end boards, so it has to heavily rely on the non-engine it plays, and it doesn't get to play that much non-engine, and also the end board it creates is not fantastic, and it loses a lot of non-engine. Now, because it's me, of course, I have to have White Force in this tier list. I don't think any other competitive player would have it on their tier list right now. I think White Force is fine. The format is not particularly hospitable, but also not particularly hostile towards it. I think you generally have a pretty positive Kultun matchup, as long as they don't draw, like, pairs of Ash and Droll. You can play, like, all the breakers that are well positioned very efficiently, such as Forbidden Crown, Book of Eclipse, Forbidden Droplet, in certain matchups, Dark Ruler no more. I think the Branded matchup is okay, but it's probably very going first heavy from both sides, I think Branded will always struggle to beat White Forest when it goes second because it doesn't get enough non-engine, and White Forest is the kind of deck that if it gets to play, you are not breaking the board. At the same time, Branded can do Sinkeeper post side, and the amount of follow-up it generates is not grindable for White Forest, so you basically always forced to OTK them, and you can't rely on Chaos Angel because they have Virtuous, so it seems like a very awkward matchup, to be honest, where you're probably getting a 60% win rate at best, unless you're building your whole deck to beat Branded, and that seems very awkward. So, I mean, if the pilot is Dino, then I would probably put the deck in like high tier 2. If the pilot is about anyone else, then I think it goes somewhere around tier 3, probably just ahead of Elf Note, to be honest. I think White Forest and Elf Note share a lot of qualities, but Elf Note has a lot more downsides that White Forest don't really. Next up is VS. VS was one of the better decks of last format, but I think VS, in the shape it is in right now, the advantages that you get from playing VS, which are like, you are a very efficient player of mulch armies because it's very scary to give VS draws because of Azuna and Holisu, and you are a very efficient player in formats where mulch armies are the main non-engine, because you can generally make your full VS board with like one draw to each Charmy, or like 1 to 2 draws, and typically like at most 3 draws if your opponent double Charmies you. The issue is that Charmies are not really relevant right now. Perulia is basically gone, and Fuba is present in like 75% of main decks, but that is historically low for Fuba. And I don't think VS is a very mediocre Branded matchup because the grind game is too tough to deal with. You can very rarely stop them from playing because it doesn't really care about removal in terms of establishing follow-up, and you can't outgrind Branded, it's just not possible. And also non-targeting removal is very good against VS. So overall I would say like VS hasn't really changed from last format. The Noroi ban is a slight consistency nerf, and it means you can't go as over the top with some of your combos, but that's fine. It's more so the environment that has changed, and with only one Holisu, which is the main strength of VS, having like a busted hand trap, the deck becomes very reliant on its qualities being good into the environment, and they just aren't right now. So I would probably put VS like honestly in Leave It Home tier. I would never bring this to a real event, but I think it is probably better than the Fairy Tail deck. So somewhere around here. Next up we have Yummy Fiendsmith. I think Yummy Fiendsmith is the only playable Yummy version, apart from like Pile, but that doesn't really count as just Yummy. I would be surprised to be proven wrong, not happily, but I would be surprised. I think Yummy Fiendsmith is fine. It shares like a lot of qualities of Malice and Power Patron, to be honest. I think it's worse than both of those probably, just because Dominus Purge is not that particularly well placed in the format. But it's just a hand trap deck that gets to dual wield Dominuses and has a solid end board. But overall I think with one Cupsy, you lose a lot of like the I normal summon a card that no matter how many single trade hand traps you have, you will never ever trade favourably with. That aspect's kind of gone, which is, I mean, not gone, it just happens most of the time, and it's the main reason the deck would have a really good Kultun matchup. Just because Kultun could throw 4 hand traps at a Cupsy, and as long as you have any extender, it just didn't matter. But what like Period Ice Map gets traded for by 1 Asher, 1 Delta, and also the deck just, you have to play so many like awkward cards such as like Lurry, both the field spells, Surprise, the smaller Yummies in certain instances, compared to Kultun that their engine is so much more compact, and like it generally just feels like a budget Kultun. I apparently noticed I put out White Forest twice. Yeah, whoops. Exact same place. Then we have Kultun. This is also obviously tier 1, that there's no beating around the bush here. I think just results-wise, Branded has proven itself as being better than Kultun for the moment, but I think a big part of that is the fact that people are more so preparing for Kultun than for Branded, and Branded inherently has a good matchup against Kultun if that is the way decks are built. But I think if Branded becomes the deck with a big target on its back, then this relationship is, if not bound to change, very likely to change. Next up we have Mitsu. Mitsu is another deck that I'm like kind of struggling to place. I've been very surprised by how little Mitsu we've been seeing and how poorly it has performed. I believe between both top cuts there was 1 single Mitsurugi, and that honestly surprises me. Mitsu has a really good matchup against Kultun, and I would imagine, at least as a lot of non super grinding professional players are picking up Branded, the matchup would be favourable, just because it seems a lot easier to play Mitsu against Branded than to play Branded against Mitsu. I will not say that Mitsu has, if both players are super experienced in the matchup and with their deck, a good matchup. It just seems like an easier matchup in the beginning. And Mitsu also just gets to play Fantastic Knowledge, and he gets to dual wield Dominuses. He can play Harmonia if it likes. And also the Kultun matchup is phenomenal just because it's so hard for Kultun to properly interact with the way Mitsu tries to play. Like, the removal doesn't really do anything. RS is easily dodgeable, back to back is very easily outable. I'm honestly surprised to see Mitsu doing so poorly. If it was me, I would probably put Mitsu in tier 1.5 just ahead of Doomsday, at least prior to the current results. But based off of the results, I just can't justify this. But Mitsu is definitely better and a better position than Malice, so top of tier 2 for now. Next up we have Pile. This goes for like sort of any version mixing between these archetypes and like Radiant Typhoon and whatnot. I have like Yami Striker Mitsu Simple Spoils up at the moment, but it can be any combination of these. Simple Spoils Mitsu counts, for instance. And I think these decks are a little underexplored, which I'm very happy to see, but also probably just not too well positioned because they kind of fold to Droll, and because they are forced to cut a lot of power from each engine to fit all the engines without having a billion bricks, they generally can't grind with a deck like Branded. So unless someone re-innovates the concepts here, I don't think these decks are amazing, but probably like bottom of tier 2, top of tier 3 to be honest, somewhere around there. Next up we have Branded Dracotail. In my banlist reaction video I said that not much was going to change for Dracotail, and I mean, I said that in the expectation that Dracotail was not going to be heavily played post the ban list anyway, or post Blazing Dominion mainly, just because it doesn't seem to have an amazing matchup into anything, and also pure Branded seems to be more efficient at dealing with the alignment. But the Dracotail cards are very powerful, and I think the reason the deck won, and as the final sort of illustrated, is that having the Dracotail cards in your Branded deck gives you an extreme edge in the mirror, because you have so much more power than your opponent does. And I think the more we see Branded, the more the like Dracotail versions of Branded are likely to pop up. So this deck is probably pretty hard to tier because I've literally seen one person pilot it, and even though it won, that was Desi Cotton, and Desi Cotton is arguably the best player this game has ever seen. But to me, I think this falls in kind of the same category as like Doomsday and to some extent Mitsurugi, that it seems very powerful but a bit untested, and also just like we just don't have enough information to say. It also kind of depends on the alignment. Last up we have one of my personal favourites, Sky Striker. I think this deck right now is probably the definition of tier 2 to 1.5. I would say in sort of same fashion as Mitsurugi. It has a phenomenal matchup against Kultun, it has a pretty good matchup against Doomsday, and I would say the matchup against Branded is like, it's very reliant on pilot skill and tech cards, but I would say it's even at worst. I'm tempted, just because of my knowledge of the deck and how strong I know Strike can be, to put it into tier 1.5. And results wise, it's like, it's kind of in the same boat as Mitsu, to be honest. We've just seen a lot more features because it's fan favourite. But I will have realisticity tie me down and leave it in tier 2. I think just ahead of Mitsu, just because it reached top 4 with Mitsu reached top 8. Just these two are basically like they're in the same spot for the same reason and are very interchangeable, which should be ahead. Let me know if there was anything you disagreed with, or if there's any other takes you'd like to see me talk about, any topics you'd like to see me bring up. I do want to try to focus a little more on uploading content, so if you have any ideas, feel free to drop them in the comments. No promises, we will see my release schedule. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Bye bye!